The cafe was busy that morning. People were quietly drinking coffee, reading newspapers, or working on their laptops. But the silence was suddenly broken. Carl walked in. He was tall, loud, and full of confidence. He wore a shiny watch and dark sunglasses, even though it wasn't sunny. He looked around the cafe like he owned it. "Hey, one black coffee, strong. And don't mess it up this time," he shouted at the barista, laughing at his own joke. Some people looked at him. Some shook their heads. But Carl didn't care. As he waited for his drink, his eyes fell on a woman sitting alone at a corner table. She was black, well-dressed, and focused on reading a file. She had papers in front of her and a pen in her hand. She looked serious, calm, powerful, though Carl didn't see it that way. "Huh," Carl smirked. "Probably a secretary doing her boss's paperwork." He walked over to her table without asking. "Hey there," he said, smiling in a fake way. "You look busy. Let me guess. Typing reports for your boss." Angela looked up. Her eyes were calm, but sharp. She didn't smile. "I'm working, sir," she said kindly. "I prefer quiet." Carl chuckled and sat across from her without permission. "Come on now. Don't be so serious. I'm just being friendly," he said. "What kind of job keeps a pretty lady like you stuck with boring papers?" Angela closed her file slowly. She didn't look angry, just calm. "I'm preparing for court," she said. Carl raised his eyebrows. "Oh, so you're a lawyer's assistant, paralegal or something?" "No," she said. "I'm not an assistant." Carl leaned back in his chair, grinning. Okay. Maybe you're trying to become a lawyer. That's cute. Good luck with that. Law school must be tough for someone like you." Angela looked straight into his eyes. "Someone like me?" she asked softly. Carl laughed awkwardly. "You know what I mean. It's hard to make it in that world, especially when you're, well, not from the usual background." Angela stayed silent for a moment. She didn't get angry. She didn't shout. Instead, she slowly opened her file again and went back to reading. Carl frowned. He wasn't used to being ignored. "Look, I'm just saying, some jobs are better left to people who fit the role. You get what I mean." Angela looked up again. "Sir, I have important work to finish. Please let me do it." Carl rolled his eyes. "Wow, so cold. No need to act like a queen." Just then, her phone rang. Angela calmly picked it up. Her voice changed. It was firm, strong, and clear. "Yes, this is Judge Angela Thomas. I'll be at the courthouse by 10. Please make sure the clerk has the case files ready." Carl's face froze. "Judge?" he said, almost whispering. Angela ended the call and looked at him. "I told you, I'm not an assistant." Carl's mouth was open. He didn't know what to say. "I have a courtroom to run," Angela said, standing up. "Next time, try speaking with respect before making judgments." She picked up her files and walked out of the cafe, her head held high. Carl sat there in silence. The people around him had heard everything. Some looked at him. Others just went back to their coffee. But one thing was clear. Carl had just made a big mistake, and he had no idea how big it really was. Carl sat in the cafe, still frozen in his chair. The woman he had mocked, the woman he thought was a secretary, was a judge, a real judge. He looked at the empty chair across from him. Angela's calm voice still echoed in his ears. "Next time, try speaking with respect." Carl picked up his coffee but didn't drink it. For the first time in a long time, he felt small, embarrassed, weak. His phone buzzed. A message from his friend, Derek. "Court hearing today at 10. Don't forget. Same judge, Angela Thomas." Carl dropped his phone. No way," he whispered. "That can't be her." But deep inside, he already knew the truth. He picked up the phone again and stared at the message. "Angela Thomas, The same woman he had just insulted is now the judge in his case. Carl was being taken to court for a business complaint. A former employee had accused him of unfair firing and using racist language. Carl had laughed it off at first. His lawyer told him not to worry. "It's just a small civil case," the lawyer had said. "Nothing serious." But now things felt very serious. Carl rushed out of the cafe and jumped into his car. His hands were shaking as he drove to the courthouse. "I need to fix this," he muttered. "She can't be my judge. She'll destroy me." When Carl reached the courthouse, he ran to his lawyer. "Change the judge. Now," he demanded. The lawyer looked confused. "We can't do that, Carl. That's not how it works. Judge Thomas is already assigned to your case." Carl's voice rose. "You don't understand. I insulted her, badly. She'll take revenge." The lawyer sighed. "She's a professional. Judges don't do that. But if you acted like a jerk, well, that's on you." Carl felt sick. They entered the courtroom. Everything was quiet and cold. People took their seats. Lawyers opened their files. The air felt heavy. Then she entered. Judge Angela Thomas walked in, wearing a long black robe. Her face was calm. Her eyes were focused. She sat down at the high desk in front of everyone. "All rise," said the bailiff. Everyone stood. Carl's knees felt weak. Angela looked around the courtroom. Her face gave nothing away. She showed no sign that she recognized Carl. She picked up the file and opened it. "Case number 485, Carl Dawson versus Michael Reed," she said clearly. "Let's begin." Carl swallowed hard. Angela listened to both sides. She took notes, asked questions, and stayed neutral. She never looked at Carl for too long. She never showed anger or emotion. Carl kept glancing at her, nervous. Was she going to punish him? Would she call him out in front of everyone? But no, she was calm, serious, professional. Carl's lawyer made his arguments. Angela nodded politely, but didn't smile. Then it was Michael Reed's turn, the man Carl had fired. Michael spoke calmly but firmly. He talked about the way Carl had treated him. He gave examples, emails, witnesses. Carl began to sweat. The courtroom listened in silence. Angela asked questions. Her tone was sharp but fair. At one point, she asked Carl a direct question. "Mr. Dawson, do you remember the words you used during Mr. Reed's termination?" Carl looked down. I don't recall exactly." Angela didn't blink. "Then I'll remind you. According to the statement, you said, 'People like you don't belong in my company.'" Carl didn't reply. The room was still. Angela closed the file. "We'll take a short break before I give my decision," she said, then stood up and walked out of the courtroom. Carl sat down slowly. He felt like a child caught doing something wrong. His lawyer leaned over and whispered, "You messed with the wrong woman, Carl." During the break, Carl walked outside and stared at the courthouse steps. How could this happen? He remembered the cafe, her calm face, her quiet power. He had judged her too fast. He had spoken to her with arrogance. Now, she held his future in her hands. And she didn't need revenge. She had something stronger. Dignity. Judge Angela Thomas sat in her office alone. The courtroom was quiet now. The break had given her time to breathe, but not to relax. She opened Carl Dawson's file again, but her eyes stared past the pages. Her mind went back to a time when she wasn't wearing a black robe, to a time when the world didn't call her Your Honor. Angela was only 9 years old when she first heard the words, "You'll never make it." It was a rainy day, and she had come home from school with tears in her eyes. Her white teacher had laughed at her in front of the whole class when she said she wanted to be a judge someday. "A judge," he repeated. "You can barely read this textbook, Angela. You should think about something more realistic." Angela didn't cry in front of him. But when she reached home, she locked herself in the small bedroom she shared with her younger sister and let the tears fall. Her mother knocked gently and came inside. She sat beside Angela, held her hand, and said something she never forgot. "Baby, they don't see what I see. You're not small. You're not weak. You're just ahead of your time." Angela's mother was a strong woman, a single parent who worked 2 jobs. She cleaned houses during the day and worked at a diner at night. She didn't have a college degree, but she had wisdom. And she believed in Angela when no one else did. In high school, Angela worked harder than everyone. She stayed up late studying, while others partied. Teachers still doubted her. Some even ignored her completely. She would raise her hand in class, but they often called on someone else. Still, she pushed forward. One day, during a debate competition, a white boy on the opposing team told her, "You don't sound smart. You sound angry." Angela didn't respond with anger. She responded with facts, law, and passion. She won that debate, and many more after that. Angela got into college with a scholarship, but even there, the battle continued. Professors would look surprised when she got the top score. Classmates assumed she cheated or got extra help because of her race. In her first law internship, a client refused to shake her hand. He looked at her and said, "I asked for a real lawyer." She smiled and replied, "I am one, and I'll do my job better than anyone else." There was one moment that Angela remembered most. Her first day as a judge. She walked into the courtroom. Everyone stood, but one man, an older lawyer, kept sitting. He whispered loudly to his client, "I didn't know they let just anyone wear the robe now." Angela heard him. She looked him in the eye and began the hearing like nothing had happened. But by the end of the session, even that lawyer was standing when she walked out. Back in the present, Angela closed Carl's file. She took a deep breath. People like Carl reminded her of her past. The ones who laughed, the ones who judged too soon, the ones who never saw her strength. But she also remembered her mother's voice. "Don't fight small people with smallness. Rise higher." In another part of the courthouse, Carl paced back and forth. The break was ending soon. He kept thinking about her voice. Calm, powerful. He thought about the way she had looked at him, not with hate, but with something stronger. He suddenly remembered something. Years ago, at his first job, he had made a joke about a black coworker. It was supposed to be funny, but the man had looked hurt. Carl never apologized. He never thought about how words can cut. Now, the past was standing right in front of him, in the form of Judge Angela Thomas. The bailiff's voice called out, "Court back in session." Carl's heart pounded. He sat down. Angela returned, her black robe flowing behind her. She looked at both sides, serious and calm. Carl stared at her, full of regret. Angela didn't blink. Because this wasn't about revenge. This was about justice. Carl sat stiffly in the courtroom as Judge Angela Thomas returned to her seat. The quiet in the room was heavy. The kind of quiet where even a breath felt loud. Angela looked calm as ever, but Carl's mind was racing. He had a secret, one he hoped would never come out. Now, sitting in front of the very woman he had insulted, Carl felt that secret crawling closer to the surface. Angela opened her file and looked over the evidence again. The case was simple on the surface. Carl Dawson had fired an employee named Michael Reed, but Michael claimed it wasn't just a normal firing. It was personal, unfair, discriminatory. Carl had denied everything, but something in Angela's eyes said she didn't fully believe him. And Carl knew why. Because Michael wasn't the only one. 2 years ago, Carl had been warned. Back when he managed a construction company, 2 workers had filed quiet complaints against him. Both were people of color. One claimed Carl had used offensive language. Another said Carl made it harder for him to get promoted, even though he had better skills. But the complaints were pushed aside. Carl's lawyers handled them. One was paid off quietly. The other just quit. Carl had never been punished. He felt untouchable. Until now. Angela turned to Carl. "Mr. Dawson, please explain the reason for Mr. Reed's termination." Carl cleared his throat. "He wasn't performing well, Your Honor. Always late. Didn't follow instructions." Michael, sitting across from him, shook his head. "That's not true," Michael said. "I have perfect attendance records. I always followed instructions. The only time I spoke up was when I pointed out unsafe practices." Angela raised an eyebrow. "Unsafe practices?" Michael nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Carl told workers to skip safety steps to save time. I refused. 2 days later, I was fired." Carl shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Angela looked through the documents. "According to the report," she said, "you received a safety violation fine shortly after Mr. Reed left." Carl didn't answer. Angela looked up, her eyes focused. "Mr. Dawson, are you aware that we received 2 sealed statements this morning from former employees? Both support Mr. Reed's claims." Carl froze. "What? What statements?" he asked. Angela nodded to the clerk, who handed her 2 documents. She read from one. "Carl Dawson made me clean up broken glass without gloves. When I complained, he said, 'People like you should be used to rough work.'" Angela looked at Carl. "Does this sound familiar?" Carl stayed silent. She opened the second statement. "I was told by Mr. Dawson that if I kept asking for fair pay, I could go back to where I came from." Gasps echoed from the courtroom. Carl's lawyer put his head in his hands. Angela didn't raise her voice. She didn't show anger, but her voice cut through the room like a blade. "Mr. Dawson, this court takes workplace discrimination seriously. This is not just about Mr. Reed anymore." Carl finally spoke. "Those statements are old. They don't mean anything." Angela looked straight at him. "Do you believe people's pain becomes smaller over time?" Carl didn't answer. Angela leaned slightly forward. "Or do you just hope time will hide your actions?" Carl's face turned red. "I was under pressure. I was just trying to run a business." Angela held up a hand. "Enough." The room went silent again. Angela closed the file. "I have read enough. I've heard enough." She turned to Michael. "Mr. Reed, thank you for speaking up. That takes courage." Michael nodded quietly. Then she looked at Carl. "Mr. Dawson, it's not just about how you treat people when they're useful to you. It's how you treat them when you think no one is watching." Carl looked down. His secret, the one he had buried for years, was now out in the open. And it had a witness, a judge who had once faced the same kind of judgment. After court ended for the day, Carl walked outside alone. Cameras had started to gather. Reporters whispered his name. He used to enjoy attention. Not anymore. He remembered the cafe. He remembered laughing at Angela. Now he could barely hold his head up. He thought about all the people he had wronged. People who stayed quiet. People who gave up. But Angela didn't give up. She didn't shout. She didn't insult. She used truth. And it hurt more than anything Carl had ever felt. The next morning, the courtroom was packed. Word had spread about the case. People whispered as they entered the room. Some came to support Michael Reed. Others came just to see the man who had mocked a judge and tried to silence his past. Carl Dawson sat at the front, his shoulders lower than the day before. He looked around nervously. Even his lawyer seemed tense now. But Judge Angela Thomas, she was calm as ever. She entered the courtroom with quiet strength. The room rose. She sat, opened her file, and spoke. "This court is now in session." Angela looked around slowly. "This is not just a case about one man losing a job. This is about dignity, about fairness, about how power is used." She turned to Carl. "Mr. Dawson, do you have anything to say before I give my decision?" Carl stood up. His voice was low and shaky. "Your Honor, I want to say I'm sorry." Angela watched him carefully. "Sorry to whom?" Carl glanced at Michael. "To Mr. Reed, and to anyone I've ever disrespected." Michael nodded slowly, but he didn't smile. Angela asked, Are you sorry for what you did, or are you sorry you were caught? The room fell silent. Carl hesitated. Both, he said. I never thought my words or actions mattered so much. But now, I see they do. Angela nodded, but her face stayed serious. Words matter, Mr. Dawson. Especially from those in power. You had a responsibility. Instead of leading with fairness, you led with fear and pride. She turned to Michael. Mr. Reed, thank you for your honesty. Your courage gave others the strength to speak up. That is what justice looks like. Michael looked down, holding back tears. Angela looked at her notes one last time, then spoke clearly. This court finds that Mr. Carl Dawson engaged in wrongful termination, workplace discrimination, and repeated abuse of power. The evidence is overwhelming. Carl closed his eyes. His lawyer didn't even argue. Angela continued. Mr. Dawson is ordered to pay compensation to Mr. Reed for emotional distress and lost income. A fine will also be issued for violation of workplace safety and employee rights. She paused. But this is not just about money. This is about change. She turned to Carl again. You can't erase what you've done, but you can choose what you do next. Will you return to old habits or become someone better? Carl swallowed hard. I want to change, he said softly. Angela didn't smile, but her voice softened just a little. Then begin with truth, and let your actions speak louder than your apologies. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered quickly. Michael stepped out to cheers. A few reporters tried to question Carl, but he pushed through quietly, no longer wearing the proud face he once had. He got into his car and sat alone. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a boss or a leader. He just felt human. Meanwhile, Angela returned to her office. She removed her robe and sat at her desk. The courtroom was empty now, but her heart was full. Not with pride, with peace. She didn't need revenge. She had justice, and she had kept her promise. To herself, to her mother, and to every girl who had ever been told they weren't enough. Angela looked at the small photo on her desk. It was her mother, smiling in front of their old apartment. Still ahead of my time, Mama, she whispered. Then she got back to work. Because there were still more people who needed to be heard. Carl Dawson had always been proud of his name. It was printed on business cards, billboards, and office doors. People used to respect it. Some even feared it. But now, after the courtroom verdict, Carl's name meant something different. It meant shame. It meant judgment. And worst of all, it meant truth. The news had spread fast. Businessmen found guilty of discrimination. Judge Angela shuts down arrogant CEO. Man who mocked black woman learns she's a judge in his own trial. Every newspaper, blog, and social media page was talking about it. People were angry. Some were cheering. Others were simply shocked. Carl stayed inside his house for 3 days. He didn't answer calls. He didn't open emails. He just sat by the window, staring out as the world moved on without him. On the 4th day, Carl's assistant, Maria, came to visit. She had worked for him for 5 years. Quiet, loyal, and professional. She had always kept her head down. But today, she looked Carl straight in the eyes. "Do you remember," she asked, "when I told you I was uncomfortable with the way you spoke to our staff?" Carl nodded slowly. "You said I was being too sensitive," she continued. "You laughed it off." Carl sighed. "I know. I stayed because I needed the job," she said, "not because I respected you." Those words hit harder than any headline. Carl looked at her. "Why are you here now?" Maria hesitated, then said, "Because I believe people can change, but only if they're willing to face who they really are." Later that night, Carl opened his laptop. His inbox was full of angry messages, bad reviews, and former clients backing out of deals. But one email stood out. It was from Michael Reed. "I didn't enjoy what happened, but I'm glad it did. Maybe now others will be treated better. I hope you learn from this." and do something good with it. Carl read the message 3 times. He felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not fear, not pride, just guilt. The next morning, Carl made a decision. He would face the public, not with excuses, not with spin, but with honesty. He called a press conference. News cameras lined up outside the building where he once ran meetings full of confidence and control. Today, he stood behind the podium like a different man. Carl looked tired. He had no notes, just his voice. "I want to say something," he began. "Not because I was full to, but because I finally see the truth." The room went silent. For years, I believed power gave me the right to speak however I wanted. I judged people based on how they looked. I ignored the pain I caused. And when someone finally stood up to me, I laughed at her. He paused. That woman was Judge Angela Thomas. She could have crushed me, but she didn't. She let the truth do the work. Carl looked down for a moment, then back up. "I am sorry, not just to her, but to every person I ever made feel small." He took a deep breath. "I've lost money, clients, and my reputation, but I needed to lose something to find what matters." Then he walked away from the microphone. No reporters shouted questions. No one clapped. But they listened. And that was enough. A few days later, Carl started something new. He created a workplace training program, focused on respect, fairness, and inclusion. He hired speakers from different backgrounds. He invited Michael Reed to be one of the first guest voices. To Carl's surprise, Michael accepted. They didn't become friends, but they did shake hands. And that handshake meant more than any business deal Carl had ever made. Some people still didn't trust Carl. Some never would. But others saw something real in him now, not perfection, but effort. Carl wasn't proud of his past, but he was finally proud of the direction he was going. And in a quiet courtroom across town, Judge Angela Thomas heard about Carl's press conference. She didn't smile, but she did pause for a moment, then whispered to herself, "Maybe some people really do learn." Then she opened the next case file, because her work was far from over. A year had passed since the courtroom trial that changed everything. Carl Dawson was no longer the man people once whispered about with fear, or laughed about in news headlines. He had left the business world behind, and focused on rebuilding something more difficult than a company: his character. Carl now spent most of his time speaking to young business students about leadership, fairness, and the price of pride. He told them his story, honestly, not to make himself look better, but to help them see how easy it is to lose yourself when you stop listening to others. His voice wasn't loud anymore, but it was finally true. One day, he received an invitation. It was small, printed on fine paper. "The annual Justice and Community Conference welcomes you to attend our closing panel on growth through accountability, hosted by Judge Angela Thomas." Carl stared at the invitation for a long time. He didn't know why she had invited him. Maybe she wanted him to speak. Maybe she just wanted him to listen. Either way, he knew he had to go. The event was held in a large hall filled with people from all walks of life: lawyers, students, teachers, and community leaders. Carl sat near the back, quietly, watching as speakers took the stage. Then, near the end, the moderator stepped up. "Our final guest tonight needs no introduction, Judge Angela Thomas." Applause filled the room as Angela walked onto the stage. Carl's heart pounded, though she hadn't even looked in his direction. Angela stood behind the podium with calm confidence. Her voice was steady and full of quiet power. "Tonight," she said, "I want to talk about the power of second chances." The audience leaned in. "When I was young," she continued, "people told me I didn't belong in rooms like this. They saw my skin, my quiet nature, and my gender, and decided I wasn't enough." She paused, but I kept going. Not because I wanted to prove them wrong, but because I wanted to prove to myself that their doubt didn't define me. The audience nodded, touched. Angela looked around the room. Some of you may remember a trial from last year, a case where truth was tested, where justice met pride, and silence met courage. Now Carl knew. She was talking about him. Angela continued, I won't name names. That's not the point. What matters is that someone who once used power to push others down chose to rise differently after falling. The room was quiet again. We live in a world that's quick to judge, quick to cancel. But sometimes real change takes time. It takes loss. And it takes pain. She let her words settle. I believe in consequences, but I also believe in growth. Angela paused. Redemption is not something you earn with one apology. It's something you build, step by step, for the rest of your life. People clapped softly, not loud, but respectful. Carl felt his throat tighten. He wasn't crying, but he was close. After the panel ended, people walked up to greet Angela. Some asked for pictures. Others just thanked her. Carl waited until the crowd thinned. Then, quietly, he stepped forward. Angela saw him. Their eyes met. He didn't speak right away. He just nodded. Angela didn't smile, but she nodded back. That was all. No handshake, no long speech. Just a moment of quiet understanding between two people who had changed each other's lives in completely different ways. Outside the hall, Carl stood alone under the night sky. A young woman walked up to him. She looked like a student, no older than 20. Excuse me, she said, were you the man in that case last year? Carl nodded. I just wanted to say, she continued, my brother works construction. He said things got better at his job after your case. His boss changed company rules. People started treating each other better. Carl blinked. That was the first time he realized real change had left the courtroom. It had spread. He thanked the young woman. She walked away, smiling. Carl looked up at the stars. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel small under them. He felt human. In her chambers, Angela placed her robe on a hook. The day was done. She walked to her desk, picked up her mother's photo, and smiled. Another circle closed, she whispered. Then she turned off the light and stepped out into the night, ready for whatever came next. 2 years later, the courtroom was quiet again, but this time, something felt different. There were no arguments, no shouting lawyers, no angry witnesses. Instead, soft music played as people filled the seats, smiling and whispering with excitement. A banner at the front read, Community Leadership Award Ceremony, honoring voices that inspire change. And in the front row sat Judge Angela Thomas, her face calm as always, but her eyes brighter than usual. The host stepped up to the microphone. Tonight, she said, we honor people who stood for justice, not just in courtrooms, but in life. People who faced their mistakes, lifted others, and left behind more than they took. The crowd clapped gently. Angela watched, curious. Then the host continued. Our next honoree is someone who once walked a very different path, a path of pride, power, and silence. But he didn't stay there. He turned his fall into a lesson, not just for himself, but for many. Angela leaned forward. Please welcome Mr. Carl Dawson. The room clapped, surprised. Carl walked slowly to the stage. He wasn't wearing an expensive suit, just a simple blazer and a blue shirt. He looked older, not just in age, but in spirit. More grounded, more real. He stood at the microphone and waited for the applause to stop. 2 years ago, he began, I stood in a courtroom and thought my life was over. He looked over at Angela. She met his eyes without a word. But the truth is, Carl continued, my life hadn't ended. It had finally begun. He told the crowd about the old Carl, the man who used to bark orders and judge people by their clothes, their background, even their skin. Then he spoke about the trial, about the pain, the loss, the headlines, and the judge who didn't humiliate him, but gave him space to face himself. Judge Angela Thomas didn't just rule fairly, he said. She reminded me of something I forgot. That change isn't weakness. It's courage. The audience listened closely, many wiping away tears. Carl finished with quiet strength. I stand here today, not proud of my past, but proud I didn't stay in it. He stepped down, and the applause came again, louder this time. Angela didn't clap at first, but then, slowly, she did. After the ceremony, Angela walked through the crowd. She didn't like attention, so she often slipped out early. But before she could reach the door, a teenager stopped her. Judge Thomas. Angela turned. The girl was young, maybe 15. She wore glasses and held a notebook close to her chest. I just wanted to say thank you, she said. Because of you, I want to study law one day. Angela's eyes softened. What's your name? Lena. Angela smiled. Then Lena, I hope to see you in a courtroom someday. On the bench, not in front of it. The girl beamed with joy. Outside, Carl stood by his car. He looked up at the night sky, a habit he'd picked up over the last 2 years. Angela walked past him. He noticed but didn't speak. But this time she did. Mr. Dawson, she said. He turned. Yes, Your Honor. She raised an eyebrow. I think you've earned the right to call me Angela now. Carl smiled. All right, Angela. There was a long pause between them. Not awkward, just full of unspoken truth. Then Angela said something that surprised him. People remember mistakes, but they also remember how you made it right. Carl nodded. I'm still trying. Angela replied, then keep trying. They didn't shake hands. They didn't need to. Weeks later, a letter arrived at Angela's desk. It was handwritten, something rare these days. Asterisk, Dear Judge Thomas, my name is Lena. You met me at the award ceremony. I wanted you to know. I got into the youth law program. I start next fall. Thank you for believing in girls like me. Someday, I hope to wear that black robe too. Sincerely, Lena Daniels asterisk. Angela held the letter close to her heart. She looked out the window, then back at the photo of her mother on the shelf. With a soft smile, she whispered, Still ahead of my time, Mama. And now, I'm not alone.